Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to the Mental Wellness Wake Up Show, a weekly podcast where growth minded, creative people come to learn best practices from both spirituality and psychology that create lasting well being. I am your host, mental wellness expert, improvised acting teacher, therapist, and coach, Dawn McMillan. Let's get to it. Hey, thanks for being here. I am so glad you're here. We're getting more listeners in South Africa. Holla! It's always really fun for me to see some of the trends in where listeners are coming from. It's so exciting, and somehow, some way, it's because of you. Because you are listening, other people are listening, and there's just more of us thinking about how we can be a version of ourselves that make not only our own lives better, but better for the people around us. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing all of the things. So what I want to talk about today is OCD. OCD. So there's a common way in which people use OCD. They're like, oh my God, I'm so OCD. And what we're really talking about is just preferring things to be orderly. You know, I walked into my office this morning and one of my picture frames was crooked, and I adjusted that. And that tendency might be something that someone would claim for themselves as being part kind of OCD. And to be fair, OCD, like all mental health conditions, is a spectrum. And there's a whole range of subclinical OCD, which is where you're OCD light, OCD-ish, where you have some of the symptoms, and they do not interfere with your activities of daily living in any way. So no one would find any reason to treat you for them. So we're not talking about that kind of OCD, that preference for cleanliness or orderliness, or just making sure you really wash your hands before and after you eat. We're going to talk a little bit more about the kinds of OCD that require treatment or would benefit from treatment. So first, let's focus on some different types of OCD. One of the main types is the O being obsession and the C being compulsion. Obsessive compulsive disorder is what OCD stands for. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways. Some are contamination fears. That's the stereotypical hand washing version. Aggressive thoughts. A lot of people don't know about that one. You can have these intrusive aggressive thoughts. And then there's also symmetry obsessions, which can come under the orderly form of OCD. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Pure obsessional OCD is getting a lot more attention these days. I keep getting advertisements for different courses with titles like, would you recognize pure OCD? And pure obsessional OCD can involve those distressing, intrusive thoughts without noticeable compulsions. What's an intrusive thought? Good question. So an intrusive thought is going to be something that just pops up inside of your head, unbidden and seemingly unprompted by what's going on around you, that disturbs you. So for example, most intrusive thoughts, many intrusive thoughts, are in the form of contamination being one of them, sex and sexuality in some form, and violence. So one person shared with me that they just have these intrusive thoughts, that every time they see someone, they have a thought pop up of how they could hurt that person. That would be an example of an intrusive thought. Excuse me, I'll try to edit that out. Checking and counting rituals is also something that shows up in OCD. That's going to be people who sometimes need to lock the door multiple times just to check to make sure it's actually fully locked, or needing to count their steps or the tiles, or those checking and counting rituals are also part of the OCD that was recognized early as being sort of a compulsion. It's the C part of the OCD. It's the compulsive nature of feeling like you need to do that. Another kind of OCD are hoarding and symmetry obsessions. So hoarding and symmetry obsessions are going to look like an emotional attachment to possessions. It can be very intense, and so it can lead to an overwhelming urge to accumulate items, even those that don't actually have any practical value. So it goes beyond collector, like I collect what do you call it? Well, Star Wars figures or something like that, to this really intense need to hold on to things or to acquire things and to not let them go, even when it begins to cause problems in your life. Symmetry obsessions is that order and balance kind of thing. Kind of the thing I was pointing to when I came in. I'm like, oh, my picture's off balance. Symmetry obsessions can compel people to arrange objects in a certain kind of way. I have a friend who just always needs to have 3 pens on her desk. That's just how it has to be. And that would be a subclinical form. It's not ruining her life. Having 3 pens on her desk is a very easy task to accomplish. And so it's not something that she would need treatment for, but it would be an example of this type of the symmetry and order obsession. So part of what I wanted to bring to the forefront this time is an emerging understanding about another kind of OCD, which is relationship OCD. And I'm seeing this on the rise, both in real life and then online. Of course, you can't really build a career on analyzing strangers online, although I imagine some people maybe could. But if you notice some of the ways that people are talking about their relationships or their problems in their relationships, it really is pointing at the rise of relationship OCD. Relationship OCD involves persistent doubts and anxieties about your own feelings for your partner, your feelings partner for you, and that can lead to constant questioning and reassurance seeking behaviors. And that can get really stressful on the relationship. It can be very stressful for the person experiencing it, and it can be very stressful for the person in the relationship with that person. So if the relationship OCD turns up in the form of, do you love me? Are you sure you love me? Are you sure you want to be with me? Are you sure you want to be with me? You don't want to be with someone else? That need for reassurance from the partner can put stress on the relationship, because the partner can begin to feel like you don't trust them or you don't believe them. If the relationship OCD turns itself inward on yourself, where you're like, is this real? How do I feel? How do I know how I feel? Then that can be distressing for you, in as much as you're in your head a lot, and it can become distressing for your partner or your partners because they feel insecure in the relationship with you because you feel insecure in the relationship with you. So it can really be quite distressing. So let's go to coping skills. They're not going to be brand new, right? They're not going to be brand new coping skills that you've never heard before, but it can really be helpful to look at them in the context of OCD specifically. So what are some things that work? Big surprise. Mindfulness. One of the aspects of acceptance and commitment therapy that can be very, very helpful is a way of being in the present moment without trying to change the present moment. And that's where mindfulness and meditation come in. So embracing mindfulness practices aids in creating distance from those intrusive thoughts and fostering a more peaceful state of mind. So mindfulness, meditation first, just helps you practice being in the presence of thoughts or feelings without responding to them. And when you practice that on the mat, when you practice that that's just a thought and you let it float by without responding to it, when you're running around in your life and that intrusive thought shows up, you can notice it as just a thought that showed up, and knowing that you don't have to respond to it. Mindfulness can be very helpful because when you're being mindful, you're being in the present moment. You're not being in your head, worrying about things or overly engaging with your thoughts. So if you are mindfully practicing being present with this moment in your body, paying attention to what's around you, that intrusive thought is less likely to get a grip on you. Another thing that's helpful is cognitive behavioral therapy. Part of what we do in therapy, depending on the client and the situation, is challenge those thoughts, challenge them. Because I have an acceptance and commitment therapy point of view, I'm not looking for good or bad or right or wrong. I'm looking for useful, unuseful. What are the consequences of that thought? So if you have an intrusive thought about, every time you see someone, you think of like how you could punch them, right? That you have that intrusive thought. We could look at that thought like, is it helpful? No. What's the price of engaging with that thought? And get to the part where it's ruining your life. So do you want to continue to engage with that thought as if it is true, if it is real, or if it is important? Things like that. There's lots of ways to challenge your thoughts. And then the B in cognitive behavioral therapy ties into the C in acceptance commitment therapy. So we're talking about behavior and commitment is regardless of what thought is occurring in your head, what behavior are you choosing to engage with? So those points of view can be really helpful. And then like finding support groups, group therapy. Group therapy is great. A lot of people are afraid of it because they don't want other people to know their business, or they're so riddled with shame that they're hesitant to be around other people. But there's millions and millions of people in 12-step programs for a reason. And part of it is when you are in a group of other people who have an understanding of what it is that you're going through, it can normalize your experience. It can increase your access to wisdom. To sit across from someone who says, yes, I also have that intrusive thought, and this is what I do about it and how it works for me, can be very helpful. And it can end some of that isolation. When we have something going on within us that we're ashamed or worried about, we sometimes pull away from other people. So I do recommend support networks and group therapy for sure. So let's go into hoarding specifically, because we're going to add a couple of other coping strategies, and these are good for everybody, especially those of us in the United States. Americans have so much stuff that one of the biggest industries is storage. So gradual decluttering. So implementing a systematic decluttering process, being supported by a trusted friend or a professional organizer, a professional organizer or some sort of member from your support group. It can really help you reduce the emotional attachment to those things gradually. So it's kind of an exposure therapy idea. OCD is on the anxiety spectrum, and exposure therapy is very good for anxiety. So what you expose yourself to in this case is letting go of an item, feeling that discomfort, and learning to tolerate that discomfort and noticing that it doesn't destroy you. So if I have all of the newspapers I've ever read since I was 5 years old, and let's say I let go of 2 stacks of newspapers, it's going to feel wildly uncomfortable. And if I just allow that to be, that comfort will crest and then it will diminish. And then I notice, oh, I didn't like that experience, but it didn't destroy me. And here are all these other benefits. And then you let go of another piece. It gets easier and easier over time. The other thing that is great for all anxiety disorders and all versions of OCD is emotional regulation. It's learning to identify and manage emotions. In this case, it would be tied to possessions, but in any form, learning to identify and manage emotions and developing healthier coping mechanisms. What we do with these maladaptive behaviors is that they're the answer. They're a solution to a problem. The problem is an uncomfortable feeling. I don't like this uncomfortable feeling, so I'm going to engage in hand washing. I'm experiencing something uncomfortable, I'm going to engage in hoarding. So because those behaviors are an answer, if we just take them away, the original issue is going to look for another outlet. So you want to give it an outlet that is healthy. So learning to manage your emotions is going to be one of them. Big one is going to be emotion tolerance. It's going to be learning how to have an emotion you don't like or you wouldn't prefer. Simply allowing it to exist. And the more we allow it to exist, the less it disturbs us And bonus, the faster it dissipates. Emotions don't last very long unless you pour fuel on the fire, unless you focus on them, unless you believe them, unless you resist them, unless you worry about them. Another common way that people work on OCD symptoms is exposure and response prevention. That's not going to work for pure OCD because there's no response. But if there is, I feel this uncomfortable emotion and I engage in a behavior like hand washing, like repetitive motion, like checking, like buying, then what your therapist would do with you is expose you to the thing that makes you upset, a germ, like a bag of garbage or something. And then you would be prevented from engaging in the behavior that you've used to combat that in the past. And then you start to learn to tolerate the discomfort of whatever it is that's disturbing you. And over time, it starts to disturb you less. And one and last final piece of sharing I want to do is about creative expression. Like using your upsets, your emotions, your what's the word I'm looking for? Disturbances to make art. It's a time-honored, tried and true way of managing some of those feelings that can be really highly pro-social. And oh, by the way, other people get to enjoy something that speaks to them and is moving to them. So there you go. There's some ideas for how to look at OCD. The main thing I would like you to take away from this is that it's normal to have intrusive thoughts. Everyone has intrusive thoughts to some degree. It's just the way the mind works. And everyone has intrusive thoughts that are disturbing sometimes. You're like, oh my God, why would I think that? That's horrible. I would never do that. Or what kind of person thinks that? The answer is every kind of person. Every person has disturbing thoughts that seem to come out of nowhere. It's not about you and it doesn't mean anything about you. The content of the thoughts don't mean anything about you. It's just another intrusive thought. Just another intrusive thought. And with mindfulness, with meditation, with distress tolerance, with being slowly and gently able to prevent yourself from doing the coping skill that you have been using that doesn't actually work, there's a way forward that could be really, really helpful. So this is just a dipping our toes into OCD. The relationship OCD has been coming up a lot. It's been coming up a lot. And I wanted to normalize that for all of us. That sometimes we can get obsessive. Not to worry. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means you're human. And with that, beautiful human, let me remind you that in this moment, you are whole, you are perfect, you are complete. And you are worthy and deserving of all the things. Until next time.